Today on Job Talk, we speak with a brilliant young music teacher. We'll also hear from a writer and producer of living history, plus Dave's take on travel. And Doug and Dave help you decide, are you being a boss or a leader? All that and more on Job Talk!
Welcome to Job Talk, where our job is to make your job more fun and profitable. My name's Doug Minderd.
I'm Dave Force.
And every week we talk with people around the country who are doing just what we all do, working for a living.
You call this work?
Fair point. What everybody but Dave is doing, working for a living.
And today, one of my favorite kinds of episodes, we're going to be talking to people who have very unique jobs, not your standard doctors or lawyers, but those unusual careers.
Yeah, we've got a few lined up today that are going to be really interesting to hear about. So call and tell us your story. What tricks of the trade can you share with your fellow job seekers, as long as your techniques are safe and legal?
Well, safe anyway.
Yeah. Safe and Mom would approve, Dave.
Okay. Yeah, Mom would approve. Now, if for some reason you don't want your employer to know you called us, you automatically qualify for our Job Talk Employee Witness Protection Program. They'll never know you were here.
Heck, we wouldn't even know you were here, except we have caller ID.
Yeah, so give us a call. What's on your mind? 888-JOB-TALK, or send us a note. Dave@jobtalk.org.
Okay, here we go. Hello, you're on Job Talk.
Hi, this is Terry from Williamsburg.
Terry, how are you? Thanks for calling.
I am well, thank you, and I'm calling about behavior management.
Oh, okay. Well, what do you do in the real world that requires some behavior management?
I work with young children. I teach music in an elementary school.
Bless your heart. I come from a long line of music educators. Thank you so much for your service.
You are welcome, and thank you. I'm calling because I have situations in my room and I need to work on the behavior management of the kids when they are in possession of sticks or bells or large drums.
They're armed, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I had more referrals to the nurse last year than the team.
Are you bragging about this?
No. I'm trying to prevent it.
Well, what are these devices? Are these devices like boom whackers or something? Or?
Right, we have boom whackers. Rhythm sticks.
Excuse me. Let me intercede here. Boom whackers. Now, here are two musicians between Doug and then Terry on the phone explaining to me a boom whacker. Is that a woodwind, a brass instrument, or a percussion? What category would that fall? A boom whacker.
Well, you have to think about how you play it. Do you blow in it? No, you don't blow in it. So it's not a wind instrument.
I was going to say no.
Do you? Okay, good. That's a good call. Do you pluck it? No, not really.
No, I was going to say no.
Right. You tap a boom whacker, hence the name boom, but they're a percussion instrument.
But of course.
They sound like fun.
So they're pitched. So it's like a xylophone, only the bars are actually tubes of plastic and they're pitched, so you can play melody or you can play chords. But the C is pretty long, and when you give a C to a kindergartner, he could take out 3 kids before you even get the rest of the boom whackers handed out.
Sounds like a design flaw to me.
They work really well, but...
For multiple reasons, they work very well.
They do.
All right, so let's get to your question, Terry. Go ahead.
Okay. When they have these instruments and when we are in class, they are generally motivated, and it makes them very energetic, which is fine. My problem is when I have a child who is not motivated and does not like music, at the age of 8. I mean, how do you know at the age of 8 that you don't like music? And I don't know how it happened or when it happened, but my question is about motivation.
Okay.
Are you sleeping?
No, not yet. Not yet. Doug's boom whacking me on the other side of the studio here.
It sounded like you were snoring. I thought maybe I talked too much. So the key to motivation is to zip it and get busy. Is that it?
No. So your question is, I'm trying to find a way to motivate, inspire, to get a child off the mark and get engaged is what it amounts to. One of the issues that I see often in whether it be parenting or in the workforce or in the schools you're talking about is that oftentimes people try to provide a motivation by baiting, for lack of a better phrase, where they try to offer, if you do this, I'll give you that. So you're negotiating before the behavior is emitted. Now, in the world of behavior, the sequence is stimulus, behavior, response. The response or reinforcement follows the behavior. You can't have reinforcement prior to the behavior. My point is that you don't want to get in a negotiation with a child and offer the carrot before they've admitted the behavior. A behavior is admitted only if it's reinforcing to the individual. And what you're pointing out is this child does not get excited, if lack of a better phrase, about music. But then again, maybe it's our definition of what that music is. To that child, it might be something as simple as rhythm, tapping his fingers on the table might be something he enjoys doing. Making a sound It might not be on pitch. It might not be on tempo. But if you can find a way for that child to the cause and effect, if I do X, I make some kind of change in the environment. Now, all of a sudden, this child starts realizing that he controls his environment and discovers what music is. We think of it as a tune, a pitch, a harmony, a melody. And to that individual, we don't know what he hears in his head. It might be something quite unique. And now you've given him the opportunity to explore and to discover something. And then that builds confidence in himself at the same time.
Right. So whatever the contribution is, you grab that and then you reinforce that.
Yes.
And then try to guide to the behavior you eventually want. But first, you just grab whatever happens and use that to motivate.
Exactly. So you need to alter your criteria so it's something that he can meet.
Right.
If you make a noise, bingo, that's reinforcement. So now he's understanding the cause and effect aspect of things.
Excellent. And then he starts to motivate himself.
Correct.
Perfect.
Intrinsic motivation.
I will give that a try.
Great. Hey, what's your next big concert coming up?
Well, tonight actually is the Cavalcade of Stars at Wallenmill Elementary School. You don't want to miss that.
Oh, that's great.
It's a fancy word for talent show because we're a fine arts school, so we can't call it a talent show.
That's great. Well, listen, thanks again for calling. You can reach us anytime at jobtalkradio.org. You can send us a note, you can check the blog, or you can call us anytime.
I will call you and let you know how it goes. Thanks so much for your help, guys.
Terrific. Thanks.
Bye, Terry.
Bye.
So, Dave, we've both spent a long time in the service industry, theme parks and hospitality, and I have so much respect for the people who have to deal with the public every day. And because the public, as you know, it's comprised of lots of different interesting people from lots of different experiences.
You are so politically correct.
Some narrow commonalities that bring them together at one place at one time. Like, for example, 56 people who need to get on a plane.
Oh!
And that's the only reason they're there.
Listen, I enjoyed traveling. I enjoyed being someplace. Getting there, that's a different issue. You talk about travel on airplanes, and I've read recently about all of these studies done on what's the fastest way to load an airplane, whether it's assigned seating or open seating and blah, blah, blah. I witnessed just the other day the answer to all this thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it.
It's money saving at the same time. Here's the point. So you buy a ticket to airplane and you get on the plane, regardless of whether you have an assigned seat or you're selecting your own open seating type of thing. From the moment you are standing next to that seat until the time you actually sitting down, if you can do that in 30 seconds or less, you get a discount. I'm watching people, they've been standing out at the gate for 45 minutes to an hour waiting to get on the plane. They finally get on the plane. Everybody's trying to get off the ground because a lot of them have connections, so they got to get there and how much time do I have to get to the next gate. Meanwhile, people are coming in, there's someone behind you, and you're stopping. These are the ones that get my goat. I had a guy yesterday, he puts his backpack up, and something falls out of the backpack. Can't quite tell what it is, but I learned eventually it was a pen. But he drops it. So now he's stopped and he's looking for this item. Now he's backing up. Oh, excuse me. He's being polite. Excuse me. He's trying to back up to find it. Did it roll someplace? He's literally on his hands and knees looking for this pen. Meanwhile, there's a line waiting to get onto the plane to take off. The stewardess, God love her, flight attendant, people, if you could get your seats, we need to get off the ground so we have connections.
So from a behavioral perspective, what's happening here? There's a certain lack of self-awareness, shall we say, on the part of some of the, right? And management's trying to affect a change, and you're sitting there as the casual observer of all of these things, and then you're thinking, what?
I'm not done. The guy finally finds the pen, and what does he have to do? He has to put it back in the backpack. You don't use pockets, so now he has to get it back out of the overhead, unzip it, put it in, make sure it's in the right compartment of his backpack, zip it back up again, double check, make sure, and then again, put it up there.
Now, what are other people doing while this is all transpiring? Are they as aware as you are?
Well, I didn't see as much steam coming out of ears as there was coming out of mine. I was admiring the flight attendant who was maintaining her composure.
Oh, for her composure. That's good.
I'm watching this, and I'm going ballistic. And this poor lady, she probably sees that every single day. There's hazard pay right there. I wouldn't survive. I'd be called in HR.
The plane finally left the ground, right?
Yes.
Correct, and you safely arrived.
Yes.
And how was the decision made to finally start the engines?
They had to wait till everybody got in the seats. So was the plane delayed taking off? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the plane was delayed. Now, in my situation, I'm watching this and I'm aggravated, but because I had a 2-hour layover, it wasn't important to me. Mm-hmm. If I'm someone that has a tight connection and I'm watching this in the aisle, Katie bar the door. You don't know what's going to happen. It's the inconsideration that just drives me nuts.
You know, the other thing that might work for airlines, if they charged you to carry on instead of the other way around.
Absolutely. That's the way to do it.
Think how quickly planes would load.
That's it. I'm saying you pay to carry your baggage on. And the other issue, like I said, if you get in your seat in 30 seconds, you get a $25 discount.
I love it.
Yeah. People want to save money. That's
and
why.
we're glad you got here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I arrived safely. Now I have to go home in a couple of days.
Well, one last question. Was all the paperwork in place?
That's the next story.
Today we're talking to Sal St. George of Sal St. George Productions in Long Island, New York. Sal has had such a fascinating history as a stand-up comedian, as an entertainment consultant to Disney and other big companies, as a protege of Bud Abbott, and now he tells America's story, highlighting luminaries who've built beautiful houses, who've invented marvelous things, who've entertained millions. And the most interesting thing about Sal is that he's done this on his own, really, as somebody who stood up a business by himself and managed to capture the hearts and minds of guests all over America. So we're interested in finding out, A, how do you build a business like that? How do you sort of search your soul and figure out that you can do this? And B, we'd love to learn more about some of the characters that he's highlighted in some of his works. Sal, are you there?
I am, and thank you for having me on the show. And first of all, with an introduction like that, that's just too good. I may as well leave now.
It's so great to hear your voice. Tell us the story of how you came to do what you do today and some of the steps that you took along the way.
Well, the story is really very simple. Many moons ago, when my children were quite young, it was Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and I wanted to take them out to do something special. And there was a historic site not too far from my home, and they were advertising a Thanksgiving night tour with candle lights, and they were going to be showing a magic lantern show. I don't know if you recall what a magic lantern show is.
Of course.
They just use a candle with a slide, and they were advertising a Thanksgiving dinner, and it was very nice. So we decided we were going to take the family, the in-laws, everybody piled into the car. We went down to this historic site. And it was just a huge disappointment. The Thanksgiving dinner turned out to be cold cuts sliced on a machine and put on a paper plate. There was a young kid in a T-shirt doing the magic lantern show, and half the slides he was putting it upside down, and it just was a very discouraging trip. And I came out and I was talking to my wife, Mary, and I said, there's got to be a better way to teach and still entertain, because they had everything there available to them. They had all the equipment. They had everything that they could have done to make it right, and they just made it all wrong. And that was my first inspiration, that I wanted to get into something with historic services.
How did you stand up the business? How did you take the leap of faith that you could kind of wrap your arms around not only the presentation part, but also the historical part, the knowledge part?
Well, oddly, I've never had a 9-to-5 job, never had a job.
And you're on Job Talk.
Never had a job, never worked for anybody else. I've always been self-employed, and I've basically taken every hobby I ever had in my life and turned it into a business. When I was a kid, I loved magic, and I took the skills I learned, and I started doing magic shows, initially in homes, and then starting and getting into bigger resorts. And then I ended up making a movie with Madonna, of all people, desperately seeking Susan. I mean, you don't expect those transitions. And it was just a matter of perseverance. And the same thing with how did I get into the theme park world. I was at a Disney park with my wife, and while we were in the park, we were watching this stage show, and Mary leaned into me and she said, you should go and talk to the people here. Just go and talk with them, see what happens. Maybe they'll hire you. And I didn't even have a resume in those days. I had nothing. So I took her advice. I sent them a letter, and oddly enough, they sent me a letter back, come down for the interview. I went for the interview, and I got a job. And that led to Busch Gardens, which led to all the other theme parks, and it turned into a business for me.
Sal, I wanted to ask you, because we try to find people that have atypical jobs. I mean, we have the doctors and the lawyers, but we look for those people that have unique situations. You do a lot of historical theater. Kind of explain to people what historical theater is.
From working at the different theme parks, I learned one thing, and that was detail, attention to detail. And I took that same philosophy and applied it to the programs that we produce for historic sites. Historic sites traditionally don't have that kind of expertise. They don't know about theater. They don't know about directing. They don't know about writing a script with humor. So I took all the skills from my theatrical background and applied it to history.
So what you have done over the years is you have created not necessarily George Washington, but in your research about George, what you have learned what his viewpoints were, what his mannerisms were. I mean, everything as closely as you possibly can to replicate him. Is that a fair statement?
Now we're giving away the secrets. If we're doing a story, for example, right now we're doing the story of Ava Gardner, who is married to Frank Sinatra. And you have to read 4 or 5 different books, maybe 6 books, and get as much background as you can on that one particular person. And we just did something about the George Washington spy ring. I have to hear Austin Rowe, one of the spies that worked for Washington. I have to hear his voice in my head before I can start writing. If the story I'm depicting is in 1937, I start researching what else is going on in 1937 and how is that going to affect my character.
You know, here it is, listeners. Here's a perfect example of someone that horizontally learns as much as he can. He's not trying to just do an impersonation of an individual historic figure, whether it be George Washington or Abe Lincoln or Ben Franklin. But Sal's taking the time to learn as much as he can about the subject matter. And that's what we talk about is when you get that horizontal experience and adding things to your background, it gives you a better opportunity to perform at your highest level. So now, Sal, back to you, a quick question. Of all the people that you have done your homework on and research on, you've kind of learned their mannerisms and so forth. Who do you really see whose mannerisms would be a successful leader in today's business world of all the characters you have researched?
My gosh, I've done hundreds, and but my gut reaction usually leans towards people naturally like Walt Disney, even somebody like Steve Martin, who I think is a brilliant comedian, but he's also progressed into so many different aspects of the entertainment world. He's a writer, he's a producer, he's a director. You know, I've realized one thing. These individuals that we all look at as America's greatest icons and legends, they didn't know they were going to be that. They didn't know. Maybe Ben Franklin knew that. but
that's what he aspired to be.
Yeah. But most of them were thrown into circumstances that they had no idea they were going to be doing monumental events that would be talked about for centuries on. And that's, I think, the core of what I try to do. I really try to find the human side of every one of these characters. And my scripts are peppered with humor. And even the most dramatic story, you can still find something in there to cause an audience to have a little bit of relief from all the tension that you may be creating.
That is a great answer. You know, Sal, you love history. We love history. We love the lessons of history. And most of all, I think we love the people of history. Of all the people you've studied and you've brought to life, is there somebody from entertainment, from politics, from science, from the realm of inventors who just stands out as the person that just makes you say, holy smoke, this is amazing?
I keep going back to Walt Disney. I just cannot believe what this man imagined and what he created and his perseverance in changing the world as we knew it. Imagine if there was no Disney, how many things would be off the shelf in these stores? What would be left on our TVs? I kind of lean toward Disney. And I'm talking about the early Disney, not the conglomerate that it is today.
Absolutely. The guy who took the risk, the guy who had the guts and the courage and the skills and the talent to see it through. Mm-hmm. Well, this has been just fabulous, Sal. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Best wishes for continued and ongoing success in what I think is just an amazing business.
And you have a great idea for a show there. Keep it going. It all starts with an idea. That's all it is.
That's true.
And success really is the first person to take the first step. Every day you come up with an idea, but there's always somebody else that comes up with that same idea. The successful person is the one that acts on it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You have a great evening.
Thanks, Sal.
Be well.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So, Dave, let's spend a little time talking about everybody's favorite subject, the boss. We've all had him and we've all been him. And it's interesting to me to try to figure out what makes a great boss and what makes a not so great boss. And the characteristics of somebody in the workplace who's got so many pressures and so many goals and objectives to meet and yet is responsible, in many cases, for the health and safety of their employees. But beyond that, the livelihood of their employees and how they feel every day at work. What are the characteristics that seem to make successful leaders? You know, it's interesting to note that in our society, if you're bossy, that's not necessarily a good thing. But if you're a leader, that's an aspirational thing. That's something that we all want to be as a good leader. So how do you split the difference there between having to maintain control, reach objectives, and all that, and provide great leadership to teams in the daily workforce?
Well, let's start with the word boss. It unfortunately takes on a negative connotation because it's a four-letter word, and sometimes it's used that way. But much like we discussed previously, it's a subjective term. Depending upon what the situation is, a boss in the military has a totally different role than a boss in a small startup company. They're both trying to achieve success, but it's measured in different ways. Again, what's the criteria for success? Everybody understands exactly what we're trying to do. What does it look like? Not why we're doing this, but what does it look like? Yeah, there's been so many conversations about boss and leader, boss versus leader, and vice versa. But I've always seen it as a good boss/leader. He's someone who clearly understands where you're trying to get to and then looks and sees what tools are available for me to get there, meaning my staff. And let's just say, for example, I have a staff of 20 people and I'm working in whatever, I'm making a product and we're constantly evolving what this product is, much like the tech industry is, every other week, if something else is obsolete. So I'm constantly evolving. A good boss recognizes what the end product is supposed to look like, and then also recognizes where there might be some shortfalls with the resources at hand. If my staff is not trained well enough, if my staff is doing too much of this and not enough of that. So I'm managing what their output is. I'm managing their behavior, but I can't control their behavior. I just control my behavior. So what do I need to do to influence their behavior to be more successful? The one thing I can do is try to make sure I convey to them, my job is to help you be successful. And the end result is success. So if we look and focus on what adjustments I need to make continuously, because what I do today is going to be wrong 6 months from now if I'm evolving. And as long as I am ready to admit that what I'm going to do today is going to be not the best 6 months, a year from now, and convey that same thing to my staff so they understand we're constantly getting better. The only way we can get better is to do something different. A good boss recognizes that.
So, business is dynamic. The workplace is dynamic. People's emotions are dynamic. Things change over time. So the great boss then has to change in response to things that are happening around them and then make sure that they're still communicating the right stimulus for whatever the new circumstances are. Is that?
That's pretty good. Now, I know someone's going to say, yeah, but what about assembly line work where I'm just putting this widget, part A into part B? I understand that. But over time, the product itself is going to evolve and is going to change. And there's going to be a more efficient way of putting slot A with slot B. So you're always looking for how do we get better at this? So even assembly line work can evolve. Maybe not as dynamically, but it will.
I once had a boss and we all felt the same way about this individual. We're not absolutely sure every day where he's headed, but we'd follow him anywhere because we trusted.
Yeah.
We trusted the leadership instincts of this individual. And, that kind of equity, if you get that kind of equity with a team, they trust you, they know that you have your best interests at heart as well. It's interesting that even if you don't have the same picture from day to day, you can get people to follow along because you have taken the high road on so many other issues and because you've built that bridge of trust. Now, the difference between having trust in your leader and being a buddy with a boss, two very different things. And one thing we've all experienced is that transition from being among our peers and then suddenly finding ourselves in a situation where we had to manage our peers. Yeah. Do you have any memories of the first time that happened to you?
I would venture to say that everybody, no matter what your career field is, that one of the worst years was that first year of you being a supervisor over other staff members. You were one of the guys, and then suddenly you're the boss. Usually it's entry level into, I'll say, as a supervisor level. It's the most difficult transition because you don't have a true understanding yet of what the whole company focus is. You don't really comprehend the business strategy of the overall company. There's a lot of things that you're not familiar with because you haven't been exposed to it. Not that you're not willing to learn, but you've not been exposed to that. So with all the tools that you don't have in your toolbox and you're trying to manage for the first time, it is the most difficult management role, and we do it as an entry-level manager position. I would rather be a manager for the first time after 20 years of managerial experience. It's kind of ironic that the most difficult is also the very first role you have as a manager. And there's probably horror stories out there of people. And
Well, it's tough. Yeah.
And a good manager is going to say, wow, boy, the hand on the forehead, duh. I
have a short list of great mistakes I've made.
Just a short list.
And a much longer list of mediocre mistakes I've made, but I love the great ones. And, it's hard when you suddenly are managing people. Mm-hmm. One of the things I think is, to the extent you can avoid it, don't manage with a lot of words. And by that I mean, don't come in wagging your finger and, spouting off and all that kind of thing. Just policies and procedures and all that. And as important as those are, I think, your actions are more important.
Yeah.
Manage by how you act. And splitting that difference between being part of the group and managing the group can be difficult. And I remember one time, I did a lot of theater work, and I came across a situation where I wanted to inspect something up on a catwalk. And it was a new team. They didn't know me and I didn't know them. And I said, so let's go take a look. And they looked up, and it was about 80 feet up there with a steel frame cage ladder. Uh-huh. So let's go. And I thought, forgetting for a minute that I wasn't 23 years old. And about halfway up the ladder, I had second thoughts about that. Managing by example, And then, of course, you get to the top, and you're on this catwalk 80 feet in the air. And, of course, they all followed, and they were a lot younger and did their job. We had a great inspection. And, of course, like all things in management, you have to make sure you don't paint yourself in a corner or get yourself 80 feet in the air, and then you have to figure out how you're going to get back down again.
Yeah.
But we all did. But, the equity I gained with the team that day, simply by being willing to say, you know what, let's go do this together. Let's do the right thing in terms of safety.
Yeah.
And let's look out for each other. And we did it safely while we were up there. But it was an action. There was no words.
Well, you bring up a good point, and this might be, philosophical, but I always felt that a boss is what someone says. A leader is what somebody does. A leader is, what does it look like? That's leadership.
Well, on that day, they followed the leader all the way up 80 feet to the catwalk.
Whereas a boss is, what does it sound like?
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah. Thanks for spending time with us today. We hope to hear from you next week.
Yeah, in the meantime, leave us a note on the blog or send us a note at dave@jobtalkradio.org or doug@jobtalkradio.org.
Dave takes the good notes, Doug takes the bad notes.
I take the high road, Dave takes the low road.
It's a journey. It's a four-wheel drive journey. Hey, thanks again for being with us on jobtalkradio.org. We hope that you'll go to our website, leave a note, post a blog, send us an email. jobtalkradio.org.
That's jobtalkradio.org.